This week, Dave speaks to Dennis Riches from Tokyo to talk about the nuclear situation in Japan. You're listening to TMI for the week of October 16th, 2017.
Hello.
Hi, Dennis. It's Dave Archer calling.
Hi, David. How you doing?
Good.
How's the sound quality?
Well, let's see. Let's get some words from you.
Okay.
And I'll turn you up a little bit. But it seems pretty good.
All right.
Yeah. It's good to put a voice to the words that I've seen.
Yeah. I heard your voice on the podcast the other day.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm not sure where to start. Well, Port Hope.
Okay.
Yeah, you wrote essentially a book report on blind faith.
Yeah, just trying to get that book back out into the public notice again.
You have to keep repeating yourself, I notice, because of our short memory span.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that book on a Port Hope website.
Ah.
And I downloaded it, and then I contacted the author and asked if I could put it together in a PDF, and then I wrote the review of it. And she was really happy. She lives in Ottawa now,
and that
really
was in 1981. She wrote that.
Yeah.
And how do you pronounce her last name? Is it Sanger?
I think so.
Yeah,
I just corresponded with her by email, so
I always mess
I never
up
heard the word pronounced.
Yeah, because there's a lot of reading going on and not a lot of hearing often. Penny Sanger, Blind Faith. Excellent. I didn't read the book. I read your report on it. I should probably read the book.
Yeah, it's not a really long book. I think it's about 150 pages or so.
And since then, the federal government, I think they allocated $3.2 billion for the cleanup there.
Yeah, which is more than they've spent on the Chernobyl cleanup and the new dome.
Right.
We're always hearing how expensive that new dome was. But, people don't realize there's a cleanup in little Port Hope, Ontario that's costing more.
Yeah. The dome, are they on their second dome at Chernobyl?
The first one was that one that was really quickly built in 1986, right after the accident. That was giving away. So I think the new one was just completed last year or this year sometime.
I can't keep track of the decommissioning cost per reactor. Yeah. It seems to go up every couple years by about 50%.
Yeah.
What is it? Somewhere, I think the last time I heard it was now they were saying that it was the same cost to decommission a plant as it might be to build one.
Yeah. And then you have to measure it in dollars then and dollars now. And
right.
What does it all mean with inflation and so on?
And then all of the other things they don't really include, like security and transport and new roads to wherever they're going to hide this stuff. Your story is quite fascinating. You had said that you had left Japan before Fukushima.
Yeah, well, I'm quite well established here. I've been here since 1994, and I had a full-time post. I still have a full-time job at a university.
Yeah.
And I had a year of leave in 2010. So when the earthquake and tsunami and meltdown happened, I was in Toronto.
Wow.
Just finishing a year of leave. And we'd given our notice on our rented house, and we were all set to move back. And so suddenly, just within those last 3 weeks of March 2011, we slowly started to wonder if life was never going to be the same in Japan. The scramble for figuring out what we were going to do.
And you would have been keeping track of radio reports and news reports in the weeks after the Fukushima accident, like a lot of other people were, myself included. And it was months before they actually admitted anything close to what was really going on there, but
yeah,
we knew something was happening. And then years later, I noticed a pattern that, it seemed to be that, a month would go by and then we'd hear that what they had said had happened a month ago was really twice as bad now. Mm-hmm. Twice as bad as they thought it was. And that pattern just continued. We were always finding out that they probably knew a month ago when they said things were okay, that things were not okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a deliberate strategy to make sure that the truth is going to be on the back pages of the newspapers.
I remember around then, because they kept talking about it in terms of the Ein's scale. Mm-hmm. And so I don't even know that it's as easy to find now, but I remember reading through a lot of the Ein's preamble and documentation and advice to countries that adopt its system on how important it was to disseminate information quickly to the public and that it be accurate. And, you kind of wish there'd be some kind of penalty for a state that adopts that system and then doesn't adhere to the basic principles.
Yeah. Yeah, but the IAEA has no enforcement powers at all. They'll just always emphasize that they are strictly advisory and.
Or even Eins could have criticized Japan for not disclosing. I mean, not that anything would have happened, but wow. So you came back to Japan. You decided that.
Yeah, well, it wasn't an easy call for sure.
Yeah.
I doubted myself for several months after that.
You've got kids now. Did you have kids at the time?
Yeah, they were about 10, 12, 14 years old at the time. In that age range. So not really sensitive babies or fetuses or infants or anything, but right. We worried about it. And I bought a Geiger counter when I came back here, and we could see. I live just about an hour northeast of Tokyo, near the airport. And so I took the Geiger counter out in the backyard, and you could see the background levels were up from like 0.05 microsieverts to about 0.12, which is it's just in that border zone where it's not really bad like up in Fukushima,
right?
But there's measurable higher levels of radioactivity on the ground in your backyard or in the kids' school zone.
I remember reading that there was a guy in the months after the disaster in northern Ontario who would go to his cottage and wipe off his solar panels and then put a Geiger counter on his paper towel. And that's a long way away from the accident. It's incredible.
Yeah, some of that was like radon washout from the rain.
Right.
And I checked on some of those guys in their YouTube videos they were posting. They were collecting donations, as they traveled across the country, wiping car windshields.
Right.
But if you check up on it, you realize people were doing that before the accident, and it's the radon that comes out after electrical storms. Mm-hmm. And it's always been there, and it may be getting a lot worse because of uranium mining and coal mining. And,
Well, in Ontario, you never know what to expect. They burn low-level waste at the Bruce plant, so who knows what's flying around in the air. Mm-hmm. So you moved back to Japan, and
I just came back to the house we own here. So.
Yeah, and how were other people? Were they panicky or concerned or have other things to worry about?
Yeah, for a little while, the neighbors were willing to talk about it, and they were expressing their concerns. But after that, I noticed a few months after, nobody wanted to talk about it anymore. It was like too horrible to think about.
Yeah.
You know, to the implications of considering selling your house or moving away to a western part of the country. It was just too much. And so after people had made the decision to stay,
it might not have been a great time to try to sell your house.
Yeah. But yeah, I went through the neighborhood. I was measuring with the Geiger counter, and you know, places where the dust collects in the gutters, and you know, the levels are a little bit higher there. We asked our local city hall to come around and clean it up, or what their plan was for it, and I got a bit of flack for that. Neighbors weren't too pleased. You know,
right.
I was causing trouble, but it was all very quiet. You know.
I've heard that there are some people who were formerly more outspoken who have gotten more quiet. I think about 2 years ago, was there a law passed in Japan that made it riskier to talk about nuclear? Because it had been classified.
Yeah, there was this law that it controls what bureaucrats and government workers are allowed to release and share with the public. So the penalties for leaking information got a lot higher, and reporters for reporting that leaked information. But I always wonder, though, if the security laws before that were good enough to intimidate everyone anyway. But I think a much stronger force is just the peer pressure on people. Like at the university, somebody advised me, you know, not to talk about it in the classroom with students, because there's always some kid who has parents working for Toshiba or one of the somewhere in the nuclear industry, and you know they're going to be uncomfortable if you talk about it in the classroom. So you know there's just this tremendous fear of you know causing somebody to get upset, you know, which is a little bit like the PC, you know, the rules we have for classroom discourse back in North America.
Would it be alarmist to suggest that there's any actual sort of pressure on, let's say, social media people to stay off the topic in terms of them possibly being charged for? But you're sort of suggesting that it was mostly government workers who. Yeah.
Not that I followed the issue very closely, but I haven't heard of anybody in social media getting silenced or pressured to stop writing. I don't think they're threatening enough to be that concerned about. And there was a filmmaker, Ian Thomas Ashe, an American who lives here, and he made some documentaries up in Fukushima about and followed the people who were pressuring for better thyroid screening. And he's gone on to do other projects for NHK. I don't think he had trouble getting his film continued by this theater that wanted to distribute it, and they got pressured by right-wing groups that come around and intimidate everyone. So they dropped his film. So that's where the pressure comes from. Things like that, not the official channels. You know.
I read the book you sent, the play. Radiant Future. That was really, really interesting. It really did, shed light on not just the fact that, that France has so many nuclear reactors, but that people have been going to hearings and speaking out and asking the tough questions for a long time in France.
Yeah, there's been a very sort of militant nuclear opposition there going back years. There was even the Super Phoenix, the fast breeder reactor was even hit with a bazooka attack.
Wow.
Before it was loaded with fuel. So that was like one of the maybe the only real terrorist attack.
Wow.
On a nuclear facility. And the bazooka just barely missed it. And that guy, the guy who did it, disappeared for years, and he finally, after the statute of limitations had run out, he appeared, and it turned out he was a Greenpeace legislator in Switzerland.
Wow.
And he fessed up to it.
Well, lucky he made that attempt while it didn't have anything in the reactor.
Yeah, it was deliberately planned that way.
Another sort of sadder similarity is it just seems like a lot of people just grow gray in front of microphones at these public hearings. You could go for decades and the fundamental issues are never raised. And of course, to be kind of smart ass, but I mean, the one thing they would never talk about at a hearing would be, alternatives and renewables. And because they're, there was some great lines from that play that stood out.
I should just tell people what it was. It's a play by Nicolas Lambert. He's done this series of plays. One on the French weapons industry, one on the oil industry and the relations with neocolonialism in Africa, and then another on the nuclear industry. And he gets up on stage and he plays. It's a one-man show, and he plays all the characters from France's nuclear history and how the bombs and the reactors were planned and built back in the 50s. And I haven't seen the play myself, but I saw some video on YouTube, and I got the book, which was the script of the play with some accompanying articles to it, and just took it on as a translation project a few years ago.
I can't help but wonder what a similar play would be like in Ontario.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe it'd become a big hit. Ed Mirvish.
Yeah. Yeah. But it wasn't a huge hit in France, but it got some attention. Yeah. I think he's actually redoing it right now. Some repeat performances.
Wow.
Yeah, but there seems to be some universal truths about the way they hold these public hearings.
Yeah.
And they're just the decisions are already made. They just got to go through this process. So hold some hearings in a place that's hard to get to, and publicize it as minimally as possible on some local billboards, and just go through the motions.
Yeah, I keep wondering what would happen if they held their hearings in Kensington Market or the Sky Dome, or and a long time ago, Rogers TV would carry hearings. I'm not saying they televised the nuclear ones, but I mean, royal commissions and so on up on Channel 100 and whatever. We don't see that anymore. And I noticed the CNSC they're having hearings right now. They're talking about OPG's costs and so on. And they tweet on and on and on about the PR points that they want to push, but they now don't even give out the link to watch it. So they're not even telling anyone how to watch it or you don't see it on CPAC. Like, why isn't it on that parliamentary channel? It's a government federal hearing. They do whatever they can. Yeah, I've gone to the hearings and they hold them in a church way out in the middle of nowhere. It's a great strategy. Yeah. I have a couple quotes I'll read at the end, I think. Talking about from that translation. That it's a fraudulent ritual that conceals an agenda that's already been decided elsewhere. And there's another section that talks about ratification of an international convention that guarantees the public access to information and to justice on matters relating to the environment. I think that's kind of interesting. The whole, sort of facade of these public hearings, and it's so clear that they never objections to what they're doing. It's just theater, essentially. Mm-hmm. It's as if OPG and CNSC are putting on a play of their own.
Yeah, and we need a professional actor to write a play about it and perform it.
Right. Well, a couple of times at hearings there are retired broadcasters and it seems like comedians reading these wonderful presentations, beautifully spoken and quite funny. So it does take kind of on an entertaining aspect. So what's it been like in the years since the Fukushima disaster? Things have quieted down. They're pushing their Olympics.
Yeah.
But it seems that the last Olympics that was held, they were swimming in contaminated water, and that didn't seem to stop them.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they're promoting the Olympics a lot. There's a lot of talk about it. Constant advertising on TV now because there are so many corporate sponsors that are just throwing the Tokyo 2020 logo into the ad. And it's been an economic stimulus for sure.
Right.
And there's a lot of construction going on in Tokyo. But the big complaint about that is that there really aren't that many young people in this country anymore, young laborers. And so the construction companies are having trouble finding people. And it took workers away from the reconstruction efforts up north, for the tsunami and the nuclear plant cleanup and things like that. So you see a lot of construction projects around the country that are just being done really, really slowly. And it's they just say that the Olympics fever is sort of taking all the oxygen out of the room.
Wow.
And but there's just a lot of desperate worry about the national debt and
right.
the demographic collapse here.
And how has that played out in terms? I mean, that's probably a trend that's been underway for a while. Mm-hmm. Did it accelerate after the tsunami?
Just about over the last 5 years, it's this public consciousness of it is much higher now, and the universities, for example, are really seeing the effect. Declining enrollment and higher competition for students. Labor markets competing for fewer people. So
now is that
wages are not increasing, but unemployment is low. You can always get a part-time job for minimum wage anywhere you want.
Are people leaving Japan, or there's less families starting? What's the...
No, it's just the birth rate, demographics. So it's been low for a long time, so it's really hitting now.
So other countries since the 60s have compensated for that by increasing immigration. Is that even possible in Japan?
Not politically possible, no. Nobody wants it.
Huh.
So they're just carrying on this way, making a lot of robots that they hope will be able to lift senior citizens out of their beds. They seem to be going for the high-tech solution.
Okay. Well, that's pretty typical for Japan.
Yeah. But anyway, that fear and anxiety about economic issues, I think, has made people less willing to talk about Fukushima.
Right.
And there's a generation of people now coming into my university classrooms that they were just little kids when this happened.
Right.
So they just really don't know too much about nuclear dangers or nuclear technology.
They gotta have some level of distrust, I would think. Do you think that they're more into wind and tidal generation and solar?
Yeah, well, at the same the electric utilities and the government planners, they're pushing renewables really hard right now. And so just in this area around me, this is a rural area, and a lot of farmers are putting up these solar farms.
Huh.
Just hectares and hectares of solar panels. And I saw weeds growing over them at the end of the summer. They got to get out and clear them.
Mm-hmm.
Like they forgot they need a bit of maintenance on these things.
Yeah, well, that actually is a good thing.
Yeah, and I think some storage technologies are coming in.
Right.
So being off-peak and things like that won't be such a concern.
In Ontario, we had FIT and MFIT, feed-in tariff, so it was a program. Is that, I guess Japan has to have the same thing if you're starting to see it sprout up on just little farms and...
Oh, yeah. They try to gauge it with the cost of the panels. So the feed-in tariff was really good about 10 years ago. But now they're trying to decrease it for new people coming in because the panels are cheaper. They try to set it, I think, at a rate that'll pay for the panels over a few years.
Yeah. Makes sense. Korea. So North Korea, what's it feel like being in Japan with North Korea sending missiles or munitions and threats your way?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. The present conservative LDP government by Prime Minister Abe are trying to make the most of it. He even called a snap election during this period. I think he realized he'll get more votes while the fear and the crisis is in the air.
Yeah. And South Korea is just dotted full of, is it mostly CANDU reactors?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
They've gone, I don't know if they all are, but a lot of what they call heavy water or CANDU.
Yeah. So you're just surrounded, and China's plugging away at its nuclear. And I guess Japan, who's been stockpiling plutonium, that's been slowed down by some of these reprocessing plants that have been canceled, closed, or you guys are just piling up plutonium?
There's a reprocessing plant in up north in Aomori. It's called the Rokkasho reprocessing plant. And years ago, they promised the local people that there would be the jobs and everything would be taken care of. And because it's reprocessing, nothing's going to be left there. It's going to all be used up in these new reactors they're building around the country, the next generation. But that next generation didn't work.
No.
The Monju reactor, the fast breeder reactor. It looks like it's going to never come online.
I thought they canceled it for sure. Maybe I just read they were considering.
Yeah, you hear different things about it.
Yeah.
But I think it's a pretty sure thing. It's never going to happen. But they still got these obligations to the local people. So they're starting up the reprocessing just to keep the jobs going and avoid having to say the whole thing was a mistake. And that reprocessing center just got caught this week in a false document scandal. They've been falsifying documents.
Right, I saw that.
Even
for
after
14
Fukushima.
years or something.
Yeah. So, even after all these years after Fukushima, when everything was supposed to be, above board and mistakes were never going to be made again, and so they still get caught trying to hide things.
I was disturbed when Japan released its finding. I don't know what department of the Japan government it was that released it, but their analysis of the cause, and the bottom line that was publicized was that it was a man-made disaster, which is just such a silly thing to conclude. But And the thing that bothered me about that was that it wasn't a fundamental flaw in the technology. Fundamentally,
Mm-hmm.
it was just that they mismanaged it.
Yeah.
It was meaning that it's avoidable and could have,
Mm-hmm.
and yet it's ridiculous. I mean, some of the plants were crumbling apart before the wave even hit.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that report never addressed the question of whether the water flooding in to the cooling system actually damaged the cooling system, so that it may not have been the electrical failure of the pumps, but just the structural damage to the pumps would have made them fail, even if electricity had stayed on.
Yeah.
I think Arnie Gunderson brought that up at one of the hearings he went to.
Weren't the diesel generators themselves physically flooded?
Yes, they were.
And, I mean, it's hard to imagine, even if they weren't flooded, but that all the conduits that carry all the wires and all the circuitry and panels and stuff and other equipment wouldn't be just totally garbage as soon as it got wet. But I think I heard that, I think it was unit number 1. There were pipes falling from the ceiling and stuff crumbling apart just after the earthquake, let alone the tsunami. That probably has legal implications in terms of it, whether it could withstand the earthquake.
Yeah. Yeah, another thing about that government report was that they even hinted that it was unique things about Japanese culture. That caused the institutional failure,
right?
The human failure. So, which implies that other cultures don't have this problem. Canadian culture is just so much more rational, and, better organized, and it could never happen.
The whole thing, just everything about it, is just so bothersome. And they're actually planning on building another generation of these plants, do you think? The ones that will use the reprocessed fuel?
I don't think it's going to happen. There's just that one, the Monju reactor they tried to build. That it failed. It failed once right after they tried to turn it on. And then it took years to get that fixed up. And then
they
it failed
dropped
again.
some stuff in
something.
it.
Yeah. And there have been problems since then.
And you guys are stockpiling tons and tons of plutonium already, so you don't even need these breeder reactors, the reprocessing plants. But I guess that's just a smokescreen for the fact that you have no place to put the waste. Really?
Yeah.
What's the connection to France? How did you wind up translating that play? Were you involved in France's nuclear before?
No, not really. I did a useless French degree when I was in university years ago, and I finally found a use for it. Just kind of got interested in going back to it, and I just knew that Japan had 50 reactors or so, and France had about the same, and it just seemed like an important sector to cover. And I found a lot of information and articles that, as far as I knew, hadn't been translated. And they seemed to be interesting, worth spreading around to the English-speaking world, especially about the repository they're trying to build there, the Deep Geological Repository. A lot of strong opposition to it, and a lot of good scientific inquiry that's gone into it. A lot of scientists who've looked into it and joined the opposition. And they've really brought to light the technical failings of this project.
And is that one of these types of repositories where they would be able to, monitor it and go in and shift stuff around, or is it a fire and forget type of repository?
I think originally the plan was to just bury it and walk away and forget it. But then critics and the government review itself decided they would have to have retrievability and the ability to monitor it
Absolutely.
over time. So
Yeah.
that's what they're working on now. But these critics say, it's impossible. You won't be able to do that. So they've got to consider permanent above-ground storage and monitoring across generations.
Right. Which, on one hand is horrible because they're out in the middle of nowhere like a thumb hit with a hammer, but on the other hand, they're probably off-gassing and their containers may need maintenance and so on and so forth.
Yeah, but that leads to the logical conclusion that you got to stop making this stuff.
Yes, I guess, yeah.
But
you got to hide
want
it.
to admit that.
I don't know if you've heard much about the Deep Geological Repository Plan here at Lake Huron.
Yes, I have. I've covered that.
Just nutty.
Yeah. Related to that, I wrote a piece that got a lot of interesting response. I think it's been viewed about 13,000 times now, and it was about the Manhattan Project waste that's in Niagara Falls, New York, on the ground there. And there's a guy there in Niagara Falls you could talk to in a future show if you like. I could put you in touch with him. He's covered it very thoroughly over the last 20 years or so.
And
but
that's
it's just
on
horrific.
The American side.
If you worry about this thing they're planning to build near Lake Huron, have a look at what's already been there, and it's going to drain into Lake Ontario. So Canadians should be concerned. Americans should be concerned,
and that's on the U.S. side. This repository.
Yeah, there was a very cheap and hastily built burial made in Lewiston. No, not Lewiston. It is Lewiston, I think. Just across on the other side of the Niagara River. And plus there's several sites around Niagara Falls, New York, that have contaminated soil, and development projects get stalled because nobody wants to buy the land and pay for the cleanup and that kind of thing.
Oh. I know that in Ontario, it basically, wherever you look, it's either a mine, a storage site, a reactor, or a forgotten dump. They're just, I think even an area in Scarborough is a radioactive site of some kind.
I heard about that one. I think it eventually got cleaned up with Rosalie Bertel got involved in getting the government to act on that one.
It's hard to keep track of all these things. And then there's in Toronto, they're at Lansdowne and DuPont, there's that, the former GE pellet factory, right in the middle of the city, right beside a CPR line. It's just crazy.
Yeah, has the Toronto Fire Department ever inspected that place or talked about it?
Well, I know there was talk about, when they sweep up, I think there was talk of dusts and other contaminants going down the drains and going into the sewer systems. And
I would think a big hazard would be fire.
Right.
Because there must be a lot of dust in the pipes there and the structures.
Right. What are we going to do about these people? And nobody wants to really think about it. I guess there's so many things to think about. Other contaminants, mercury, gluten. Right. People have a full plate of things to worry about.
Yeah.
So what do you think is going to happen over time in Japan? What side will win? The pro-nuclear or the anti-nuclear, or? Well,
I think the economics will eventually make the nuclear project fail here. It just won't be affordable.
Yeah.
And the demographics are really bad. So, 60 to 100 years from now, the population is going to decline by about half.
Wow.
So energy demand will be falling. Yeah. And you wonder how they can keep training a new generation of nuclear experts to take care of this decommissioning, let alone the building of new reactors. Yeah. I just don't see it having any future.
That was something that was suggested with the Hinkley C and I guess the Vogel and VC Summer, was that the talent had long since retired.
Yeah.
If you want to call it talent.
Yeah, that's happening everywhere.
Yeah. I can't.
Yeah, I just saw an article this morning saying the Brexit is going to affect the nuclear industry in Britain. Euratom is the big treaty and agreement, between countries in Europe about moving nuclear skilled workers and nuclear materials around Europe. And if Brexit happens, they need a totally new trade agreement for Britain to be able to keep operating.
So the contracts that they had formed would become sort of null and void.
Yeah.
Couldn't they'd probably just sit down and renegotiate something?
Yeah, that's what this article says. But with Brexit looming, that's got to be done quickly.
Yeah. That VC Summer, they canceled it after spending a couple $1 billion already and charging it to the ratepayers in advance, as they like to do. And everybody's waiting to see if this Vogel will also be canceled. And the Hinkley. Why is it that the only countries that are building these things is Russia and China?
Yeah. Russia seems to get a free ride. Rosatom doesn't get much attention. You would think with all the anti-Russia hysteria going on, somebody would just speak up and scream about their nuclear expansion. But it's funny that the anti-Russia people don't want to talk about that one.
Yeah. I thought that one of these controversies that Trump has gotten himself into was over. I'm not sure which of his minions were. Is it Bannon? Was actually involved in some of the contacts they had with the Russians were negotiating nuclear-related contracts. And I know that I thought I read something where Westinghouse was possibly going to be supplying fuel to some reactors that also were fueled by Rosatom, and essentially they were going to try to compete somehow. Westinghouse bankrupting, that alone, back to France, a lot of their reactors are Westinghouse.
Yes.
When a company that big can go bankrupt or be in such loss, it really, it's just like Areva or what's another one? But they're always, I think the difference is that China and Russia, they're not showing their books to anyone.
Yeah.
And so that's why all the Western corporations that are involved in nuclear are bankrupting.
Yeah. Yeah, and in Russia and China, the state is heavily involved too. They don't call them private companies.
Right.
The same way.
What's next for you in terms of your nuclear writing?
Oh, that's a good question. After doing this for 5 years, I got a lot interested in disarmament and then into history and Cold War history, peace and war, and conventional military forces too. And, the military bases that are here in Japan,
right.
and Korea. I think it's all got to be tied together somehow.
And Blackwater fills in the spaces between the chunks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm working on a project now, just historical research about American involvement in Central Africa in the late 80s and early 90s, and how that led up to the wars in Rwanda and Congo.
Right.
And it's actually, I'm a language teacher. I'm a linguist before I did all this stuff. So I'm relating it to how they basically booted the French out of Rwanda and Central Africa and installed an English-speaking government and used language policy to sort of promote that program. So that's what I'm working on right now. It doesn't have much to do with nuclear.
That reinforces probably a class differentiation as well. By having everything done in a particular language, it would exclude the natives.
Yeah, well, the French was the official language in Rwanda, for example, ever since the Belgians colonized it, and so by switching the official language, the other official language besides the native language, switching that to English just oriented them with America and Britain and reduced the French influence in Central Africa, and just excluded the generation that had been there during the genocide.
Uh-huh. So you are from Toronto?
Yes, I am.
Were you born here?
Yep. Grew up in Don Mills in Scarborough.
And you up and left?
Yeah, I up and left years ago, way back in my 20s. So.
And what drove you to do that?
I had a teaching certificate, and just that year I graduated, it was one of those years when they weren't hiring.
Yeah.
So I came over here to teach English and just ended up staying.
Was that recession in the early 90s part of it? I mean, at that point, everybody was leaving Toronto, and I guess, I'm not even sure they were heading for Edmonton, but that hadn't started yet. But I kept hearing that, the overall population was declining during those years, because there literally was it was a pretty bad recession.
Yeah. Yeah, there were up and downs throughout the 80s and 90s. Like one year, they'd say, we need teachers, and the next year, they didn't. And they would shrink the teaching program, turn it from a 2-year program to a 1-year program if they needed teachers quickly, and turn it back into a 2-year program when the job market slowed down. But anyway, no, I left in the 80s. I was over here in 87 for the first time during the boom years of Japan's so-called bubble economy.
And you're in a sort of rural area now. I assume it's pretty beautiful.
Yeah, it's kind of urban, kind of like maybe Oshawa or Pickering area.
Huh? Yeah.
It's an airport town, but a lot of nice farm country around it, and 1 hour into Tokyo from here.
Hmm. Do you get much opportunity to take advantage of the ocean when you live in Japan? I mean, you're surrounded by it. Are there good shores or places that you?
Yeah, a lot of people surf.
Yeah.
Maybe they shouldn't now because of what's in the water after Fukushima. They're digging up cesium and plutonium on the beaches.
Yeah, but maybe on the other shore, it's on the other side of the island. It's okay over there.
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah, there's a lot of good beaches and ocean recreation in Japan.
Yeah. So you don't regret leaving Toronto?
Oh no, it's kept life interesting anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Most of the people that I went to school with, they all are in other countries, spread out all over the world. I'm the only person who hung around here. So I guess I'm questioning whether that was a good idea or not. But I'm surviving, so. What are we going to find on your blog?
On my blog recently, I got 2 blogs on Blogspot. One is called Nuclear Free by 2045, an idea I started up just after 2011.
Yeah.
And I hear other people echoing the same idea, either to eliminate nuclear weapons or to eliminate both weapons and nuclear energy by the 100th anniversary of the first nuclear detonation. So maybe that idea will catch on. So that one's called nf2045.blogspot.com. And then I started up another one where I write about other issues. And it's called litbyimagination.blogspot.jp.
Live by?
Yeah, lit, L-I-T-B-Y, imagination.
Okay. That's kind of...
Taken from a line of Emily Dickinson poetry.
Interesting.
But yeah, anyway, I read about nuclear there a little bit, but other things too.
Great. Anything else you want to push?
Through my blogging, one of the best things about it, I think, is just you get contact once in a while from interesting people.
Right.
A lot of the authors I wrote about, corresponded with me by email. So I met, for example, Robert Jacobs. He's a professor down at the Hiroshima Peace Institute.
Yeah.
I worked with him a lot.
I think I've seen him on Twitter.
Yeah, he's a good person to follow on Twitter or Facebook. And he's a historian of the nuclear bomb tests.
Yeah.
So does a lot of work with the victims in various bomb testing sites. And I work also on dianuke.org. dianuke.org.
Yeah.
And there's a fellow there named Kumar Sundaram who is a very activist. He's traveled all over India working on opposition to the nuclear expansion there.
Right.
And that has a lot of connections to Canada.
It sure does.
Yeah, the CANDU reactors.
No kidding.
Contributed to the first Indian bomb.
In 1974.
So,
thank you, Ontario.
If I could recommend one site for listeners to go to that one.
Okay.
Check it out, or check out the Facebook page for Dianuke. It's a very good news aggregator now for nuclear news, and their website has a lot of good original articles.
The fellow in Niagara Falls, how do we Google him?
I'm not sure if he has a website. He's on Facebook, and I can give you contact information later.
Okay.
But his name is Lou Ricciuti.
Oh.
And you can find some of his old articles on a local Buffalo newspaper called Artivoice.
Okay.
If you Google that, ARTVOICE, Buffalo newspaper, and a lot of his articles on the Manhattan Project waste in Niagara Falls.
Right.
Can be found there.
Just looking through my notes here. Liability. I was always curious about the extent of GE's ownership. All those reactors in Japan, the BWRs at least, they all were turnkey operations.
Yeah.
Every panel and piece of them has GE printed on them. And I kept hearing in the news that they kept referring to TEPCO as the operator.
Yeah.
And I think they are the owner, but it really made me wonder, could GE be the owner and TEPCO the operator? I mean, what role does GE play in all of this in terms of liability? Yeah,
I think, if I recall right, I think very early on in 2011, in the first few months, they got off the hook from it. I think the Japanese government and TEPCO took it all on themselves.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What do you make of that? Did they buy their shares, or were they never really, or was a law that
they were
was
never
passed?
Really. I think TEPCO. Yeah, if TEPCO's called the operator, I think that's just hiding the fact that they are the owners of the plant. They owned it, and I think there was some decision made at some time that GE was not going to be liable for anything.
it's off topic, but I remember one of the most fascinating moments of my keeping an eye on this Fukushima thing was that the NISA spokesman, who we just hung on his every word for months and months and months, seeing what they would admit, I kept sort of justifying the fact that I felt like I never really knew what was going on, and that pattern I mentioned before about it was always twice as bad as they said it was 2 weeks ago. And then it turned, I thought it was a lot lost in translation, and then I found out he's Harvard Law trained, this guy.
Yeah.
He was the guy, I think he resigned. There was a bit of a sex scandal about a year after, but Kageyama, I can't remember his last name. But Harvard Law trained, you know?
Yeah.
Like clearly able to deliver the information we wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And not doing it.
Yeah. And he could have spoken to the world in English too.
Right.
But, yeah. Yeah, well, there was a compensation claim or compensation case that came out this week, and the headlines looked really great. It was like the judge finds TEPCO and the Japanese government liable for compensating voluntary evacuees.
Yeah.
And the amount's at $4.4 million. But then you read the fine print in the article, and it says there were 3,800 plaintiffs. So divide 4.4 million between 3,800 people.
Wow.
And they're getting like $1,500 each.
That's insane.
Yeah. So
and those
that's
are
what counts as a victory here.
Those are the voluntary ones. What about the involuntary evacuees?
Yeah, well, they got some compensation because they were, within the zone, and they were put in temporary housing and so on. It wasn't great compensation, but now a lot of them are being forced back because the government has declared their town safe to inhabit again.
This is crazy.
Even though the forests are still full of cesium, they haven't been decontaminated. So.
Well, I mean, presumably your land would be worth less. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or the government should buy it. Or, well, I don't know. The mathematics of how many years do you count by per reactor accident?
Yeah.
When you divide the years by the reactor accident, I guess we're due for one pretty soon. Better not be here. But it inevitably will happen again, and now every time this happens, they just update their playbook on how to play these disasters. Thanks, Dennis.
Oh, thank you, Dave, for giving me the time and the interest in my writing. Okay. Well, I think I know a couple of people who would like to talk to you, too, in future shows. So I'll send those names along.
That'd be terrific. Well, It's been great. Thanks.
Links to the Art Voice article, the story of nuclear waste at Niagara Falls, and Dennis's introduction to that article. They'll link to Kumar Sundaram's dianuke.org, and Dennis's article on the fascinating play about French nuclear, A Radiant Future. Those links all at thatarcher on Twitter, and also in the show notes. Dennis is also on Facebook, facebook.com/dennis.riches.14. TMI with Dave Archer can be heard anywhere you find podcasts. Find us on Twitter, The Price Anderson Act, @thatarcher. Find our webpage at libsyn.com. Subscribe to us on Laughable, Stitcher, YouTube, Player FM, Google Play Music, Castbox, Blueberry, Listen Notes, Spotify, TuneIn, or iTunes. Almost anywhere you find podcasts. If you would like to be a guest or to leave a comment, please email the show, archer@twxnet.com. @R.A. Kramer on Twitter. 10 lessons learned in Japan. 1. Don't place nuclear reactors next to one another. 2. Don't leave spent nuclear fuel near reactors. 3. You need at least 2 separate access routes. 4. You need backup control rooms in distant bunkers. 5. You need more on-site and off-site backup power. 6.
You need better evacuation plan for larger areas. 7. You need sensors, cameras that work post-accident. 8. You need staff willing to die for families and neighbors. 9. You need massive reserves to pay compensation. And 10. You need an honest assessment of costs and risks. At R.A. Kramer. It's actually at R.A.K.R.A.E.M.E.R. Fascinating person on Twitter to follow.